The silence in the room was heavy enough to crush a soul. 5 greedy people sat in leather chairs, their eyes glued to the lawyer, waiting to hear how many millions they had inherited. In the corner, clutching a wet raincoat, stood the one person nobody noticed. They thought she was weak. They thought she was stupid. They thought she was just the help. But when the lawyer, Mr. Sterling, finally looked up from the document and spoke her name, the air left the room. It wasn't just a bequest. It was a bomb. And when the dust settled, the Vance family would never be the same again. The rain in Seattle on October 14th was relentless. It didn't just fall. It hammered against the black umbrellas of the mourners standing around the grave of Arthur Vance. He was a titan of industry, a man who had built Vance Logistics from a single truck into a global shipping empire. To the world, he was a genius. To his family, he was an ATM that had finally, conveniently, broken open. Serena Vance stood at the very edge of the crowd. She wasn't under the large, heated canopy reserved for the immediate family. She was standing in the mud, holding a small, broken umbrella that flipped inside out every time the wind gusted. She looked at the back of her husband's head. Richard Vance. He was wearing a custom-tailored Italian suit that cost more than Serena's father had made in a year. Richard's arm wasn't around Serena. It was draped consolingly around his mother, Victoria. Victoria Vance was a woman made of ice and diamonds. Even at her husband's funeral, she looked less like a grieving widow and more like a queen waiting for her coronation. She turned her head slightly, her sharp eyes scanning the crowd until they landed on Serena. She sneered, a micro-expression of pure disgust, before turning back to the priest. Serena shivered. She wasn't cold just from the rain. She was cold from 5 years of marriage that had slowly stripped away every layer of her self-esteem. Amen, the priest concluded. As the crowd began to disperse toward the waiting line of limousines, Serena stepped forward to join her husband. She reached out, her hand trembling slightly, to touch Richard's sleeve. "Richard," she whispered, "can I ride with you? My shoes are soaked." Richard spun around, his face twisting into a scowl that he quickly hid from the nearby photographers. He grabbed her elbow, his grip painful. "Don't embarrass me, Serena," he hissed, his voice low and venomous. "The limo is full. Mother needs space, and my brother Marcus is riding with us. You take the sedan with the staff." "But I'm your wife," Serena said, her voice barely audible over the rain. "Then act like it and stop making scenes," Richard snapped. He brushed off his sleeve where she had touched him, as if she were contagious. "And fix your hair. You look like a drowned rat. It's disrespectful to my father's memory." He turned and walked away, sliding into the back of the lead Mercedes. Serena watched as the door slammed shut. Through the tinted window, she saw him pull out his phone. He was smiling. He wasn't grieving. He was likely texting her. Jessica. Serena knew about Jessica. It was hard not to know when your husband came home smelling of unfamiliar perfume, or when business trips to erratic locations coincided perfectly with Jessica's Instagram posts. Serena had stayed silent, not out of stupidity, but out of a promise she had made to Arthur Vance on his deathbed. "Wait," Arthur had rasped, gripping her hand with surprising strength just 3 days ago. "Promise me you'll wait until the reading. Don't leave him yet. Promise me, child." So, she waited. Serena walked to the older grey sedan parked behind the hearse. The driver, a kind elderly man named Thomas who had driven Arthur for 20 years, opened the door for her. "I'm sorry, Mrs. Vance," Thomas said softly, his eyes filled with pity. "They shouldn't treat you this way." Serena gave him a sad, tired smile. "It's okay, Thomas. I'm used to it." Mr. Arthur thought the world of you, you know, Thomas said as she slid into the back seat. He saw everything, even when people thought he was sleeping. Serena nodded, tears finally pricking her eyes. Arthur had been the only one who thanked her when she brought him tea, the only one who noticed when she wore a new dress, the only one who remembered her birthday. Richard and Victoria treated her like an unpaid maid, someone to organize parties, clean up messes, and stay out of sight. But Arthur had treated her like a daughter. Now he was gone, and she was alone in a shark tank. The reading of the will was scheduled for 3 days later at the offices of Sterling, Holt and Associates. The building was a glass monolith in downtown Seattle, screaming wealth and power. The conference room was vast, dominated by a mahogany table long enough to land a plane on. Victoria sat at the head of the table, tapping her manicured fingernails against the wood. To her right sat Richard, looking bored and impatient. To her left was Marcus, Richard's younger brother, a man who had failed at 3 different startups funded by Daddy's money and was currently finding himself in Las Vegas, though he had flown back specifically for the check. Serena sat in a chair against the wall, away from the table. "Why is she here?" Victoria asked, not looking at Serena, but addressing the empty air. "This is a private family matter." "The lawyer insisted all spouses be present, Mother," Richard said, checking his Rolex. "Let her sit there. She won't understand the legal jargon anyway. Just don't speak, Serena." "I won't," Serena said softly. The door opened, and Mr. Jeffrey Sterling walked in. He was a man in his 60s with silver hair and a reputation for being ruthless. He carried a thick leather folio. He didn't smile. He walked to the head of the table, forcing Victoria to scoot her chair aside, asserting his dominance immediately. "Good morning," Mr. Sterling said. His voice was gravelly. He placed the folio on the table. "We are here to execute the last will and testament of Arthur James Vance." "Let's get on with it, Jeffrey," Marcus said, leaning forward. "I have a flight at 6. "Patience, Marcus," Mr. Sterling said, his eyes cold behind his spectacles. Arthur's instructions were very specific. He opened the folder. The sound of paper shuffling was the only noise in the room. "First," Sterling began, "regarding the liquidity assets. To my sister, Beatrice, whom I haven't spoken to in 10 years, but who I know is watching via live stream. I leave the sum of $10,000, on the condition she uses it to take a vow of silence." Marcus snickered. Victoria rolled her eyes. "Arthur and his jokes." "To my devoted staff," Sterling continued. "Thomas, my driver, Martha, my cook, and Henderson, my gardener. I leave $500,000 each, tax-free." Richard slammed his hand on the table. "$500,000? For the gardener? That's absurd. We'll contest that." "You will contest nothing," Sterling said sharply. "The will is ironclad, Richard. Arthur was of sound mind. Do not interrupt me again." Richard sat back, fuming, his jaw clenched. Serena watched him from her corner. She knew what he was waiting for. The company, the shares, the billions. "To my wife Victoria," Sterling read. Victoria straightened up, smoothing her dress. "I leave the lakeside estate in Geneva, the jewelry currently in her possession, and a monthly stipend of $25,000. The room went silent. "Excuse me," Victoria whispered, her face losing all color. A stipend? 25,000? That barely covers my country club fees. Where is the capital? Where are the stocks?" "The stipend is contingent on you not remarrying," Sterling added dryly. "If you remarry, the stipend ceases." "This is an insult," Victoria shrieked, standing up. "I was his wife for 40 years. And for 30 of them, you slept in a separate bedroom and spent his money on pool boys," Sterling said, not looking up from the paper. Arthur knew Victoria. He always knew. Victoria collapsed back into her chair, gasping for air. "To my son, Marcus," Sterling continued, "I leave my collection of vintage cars, valued at approximately $4 million. However, they are held in a trust. You cannot sell them. You may only drive them. If you attempt to sell them, they will be donated to charity." Marcus looked like he was about to vomit. He needed cash to pay off his gambling debts, not cars he couldn't liquidate. "He can't do this! I need the money!" "And finally," Sterling said, turning his gaze to Richard. Richard smirked. This was it. The other two had been snubbed, which meant he, the eldest, the one who actually worked at the company, albeit lazily, would get the empire. "To my eldest son, Richard," Sterling read, "I leave the family home in Seattle and my seat on the board of directors, provided he can maintain a majority vote." Richard exhaled, a massive grin spreading across his face. Finally. The house and the board seat. That's the control. I knew the old man wouldn't leave me hanging. "However," Sterling said, raising a finger, "the board seat is useless without the controlling interest of the company shares. Arthur owned 60% of Vance Logistics. That 60% represents the controlling power of the entire empire." Yes, give me the shares," Richard said, holding out his hand. Mr. Sterling closed the folder partially and looked over the rim of his glasses. He didn't look at Richard. He didn't look at Victoria. He looked past them. He looked at the corner of the room. "Mrs. Vance?" Sterling said. Richard looked confused. "I'm right here." "Oh, you mean my mother?" "No," Sterling said firmly. "I mean Mrs. Serena Vance. Serena, would you please join us at the table?" Serena felt her heart hammering against her ribs like a trapped bird. This was the moment. She stood up, her legs feeling like jelly, and walked toward the empty chair opposite Richard. "Why are you calling her over?" Richard scoffed. "Did Dad leave her a tea set? A vacuum cleaner?" Serena sat down. She didn't look at Richard. She looked straight at Mr. Sterling. "Hello, Serena," Sterling said, his voice softening for the first time. "Are you ready?" "Yes, Mr. Sterling," she replied. Her voice was steady, surprising even herself. "Very well." Sterling cleared his throat and looked back at the document. "To the person who sat by my side during chemotherapy when my family was vacationing in Saint-Tropez. To the person who learned the intricacies of my business by reading my ledgers aloud to me when my eyesight failed. To the only person in this family who possesses both a heart and a brain." Sterling paused for effect. The room was so quiet you could hear the hum of the air conditioning. "I leave the controlling 60% stake of Vance Logistics, all offshore cash reserves totaling $300 million, and the final decision-making power regarding the employment of all family members within the company, to my daughter-in-law, Serena Vance." The gasp wasn't just a sound, it was a physical force. Victoria made a noise like a dying cat. Marcus dropped his phone. Richard simply froze. His brain couldn't process the words. It was as if the lawyer was speaking a foreign language. "What?" Richard finally whispered. That's a joke. That's a mistake. Read it again." "It is no mistake, Richard," Sterling said. "Serena owns the company. She is your boss. She is the chairman. She is the CEO. She's a nobody!" Richard screamed, slamming his fists on the table, his face turning a violent shade of purple. "She's a high school dropout from the Midwest. She used to wait tables. She doesn't know anything about logistics. She's just Serena." "Actually," Sterling said, pulling a second document from his folio, "that is where you are wrong. Arthur paid for Serena to finish her education in secret. She holds a master's in business administration from Stanford, earned online over the last 4 years while she was taking care of the house. She also has been advising Arthur on all major acquisitions for the last 18 months. That merger with Blue Water Shipping? That was Serena's idea. Richard looked at Serena, horror dawning in his eyes. He looked at the woman he had berated, ignored, and cheated on. The woman he had treated as furniture. Serena slowly raised her eyes to meet his. The fear was gone. The timidity was gone. In their place was a cold, steely resolve that looked terrifyingly like Arthur Vance. "You," Richard stammered, "you played us." "I didn't play anyone, Richard," Serena said. Her voice was calm, but it carried a weight of authority that Richard had never heard before. "I just paid attention. Something you never did." "This is fraud," Victoria yelled, finding her voice. "She manipulated a dying man. Undue influence. We will sue. We will bury you in court, you little gold-digging witch." "I anticipated this," Sterling interrupted, holding up a USB drive. "Arthur recorded a video will 2 days before he passed. He explicitly details his mental state and his reasons for cutting you all out. He also details other things." Sterling looked at Richard with a look of pure disdain. "What other things?" Richard asked, a bead of sweat rolling down his temple. "Arthur hired a private investigator 6 months ago, Richard," Sterling said. "He knows about Jessica. He knows about the apartment you bought her in Belltown using company funds. That is embezzlement, Richard. A felony." Richard sank back into his chair, destroyed. Serena stood up. She placed her hands on the table and leaned forward. "We are done here for today," Serena said. "Mr. Sterling, please prepare the transfer documents. Victoria, Richard, Marcus. I expect you all in my office at 9:15 a.m. tomorrow. Do not be late. We have a lot of changes to discuss." She turned to leave. "Where are you going?" Richard cried out, desperate. "Serena, wait! We need to talk! Honey, please!" Serena stopped at the door. She didn't turn around. "My name is Ms. Vance," she said, "and I have a company to run." She walked out, leaving the 3 of them sitting in the ruins of their expectations. The elevator ride to the 40th floor of the Vance Logistics Tower the next morning was the longest of Richard Vance's life. Usually, the security guards would nod deferentially, and the receptionist would have his coffee ready. Today, the security guard asked to see his ID badge. When Richard swiped it at the turnstile, the light flashed red. Access denied. "There must be a mistake," Richard snapped, his face flushing as a line of employees formed behind him. "I'm Richard Vance. Open the gate." "I can't do that, sir," the guard said, looking uncomfortable but firm. "Your clearance has been suspended, pending a review by the chairman." "The chairman?" Richard spat. "You mean my wife? This is ridiculous. Let me up." Eventually, Thomas, the family driver, appeared from the elevator bank. But he wasn't wearing his usual chauffeur's cap. He was wearing a suit. He swiped a MasterCard, opened the gate, and gestured for Richard to follow. "She's waiting for you in the main boardroom," Thomas said. "Since when do you give orders, Thomas?" Richard muttered, adjusting his tie. "Since Mrs. Vance appointed me head of corporate security this morning," Thomas replied calmly. "Turns out, 30 years of driving gives you a good eye for who is loyal and who is stealing gas money." When Richard entered the boardroom, he found Victoria and Marcus already there. Victoria was pacing, looking haggard. She hadn't slept. Marcus was slumped in a chair, looking at his phone, probably checking if his credit cards had been cancelled yet. At the head of the table, Arthur's old seat, sat Serena. She looked transformed. Gone were the oversized cardigans and the messy bun. She wore a tailored navy blazer, her hair was sleek and straight, and she was reading a financial report on a tablet. To her right sat Mr. Sterling, the lawyer, and to her left was a woman Richard didn't recognize, a sharp-eyed forensic accountant named Sarah Jenkins. "Sit down," Serena said without looking up. "Serena, this charade has gone on long enough," Victoria started, trying to summon her usual haughty tone. "We need to discuss the stipend. 25,000 is simply not feasible for a woman of my stature. I have galas to attend. You have a mortgage fraud problem, Victoria," Serena interrupted, finally looking up. She slid a file across the table. "Arthur knew you were taking out loans against the summer house in the Hamptons. A house you didn't technically own because it was in the company's name," Serena said. "You forged his signature 3 times. Victoria froze. Her mouth opened and closed like a fish. "That's 5 years in federal prison," Mr. Sterling added helpfully, "unless the company decides not to press charges." Serena turned her gaze to Marcus. "And you. You've been using the corporate expense account to fund your gambling trips to Macau. $200,000 labeled as client entertainment. Except the clients were blackjack dealers." Marcus shrank into his chair. "And Richard," Serena said, her voice dropping an octave. She turned to the forensic accountant. "Sarah, would you break it down?" Sarah Jenkins cleared her throat. "Mr. Vance has been funneling approximately $40,000 a month into a shell company called J Corp Consulting. The sole registered agent of J Corp is a Miss Jessica Miller. The funds were used to purchase a condominium in Belltown, a Porsche Cayenne, and several luxury vacations." Richard felt the blood drain from his face. He looked at his mother. Victoria looked back at him with pure venom. "You idiot!" Victoria hissed at her son. "You let her catch you." "I didn't think she would look," Richard defended himself. "She was just the housekeeper. She was supposed to be stupid." "That was your fatal mistake, Richard," Serena said quietly. "You confused silence with stupidity. I saw every bank statement that came to the house. I saw every receipt you left in your pockets when I did your laundry. I knew about Jessica 2 years ago." "Then why did you stay?" Richard asked, his voice trembling. "Why didn't you leave?" "Because Arthur asked me to protect his legacy," Serena said. "He knew you would drive this company into the ground within 6 months. He wanted to make sure the ownership transferred securely to someone who wouldn't let 5,000 employees lose their jobs just so you could buy your mistress a Porsche." Serena stood up. The power in the room gravitated toward her. "Here is the deal," she announced. "I am not sending you to prison. Not yet. It would be bad for the stock price to have the entire founding family indicted on the same day." She placed 3 documents on the table. "Victoria, you will sign over the Hamptons house to the company to cover your debt. You will live on the stipend Arthur left you. If you complain, I hand the forgery evidence to the FBI." Victoria signed, her hand shaking so hard she tore the paper. "Marcus, you are cut off. Completely. You can keep the cars Arthur left you, but you can't sell them. If you want money, you can apply for a job in the warehouse. Starting wage is $22 an hour." Marcus threw his pen across the room, but eventually signed the waiver, acknowledging his debt. "And Richard," Serena said, looking at her husband, "you are fired as vice president." "You can't fire me," Richard whispered. "I'm a Vance." "You are fired," she repeated. "However, the company has a vacancy. We need a manager for the sanitation and waste disposal unit in our Alaska branch. It pays $60,000 a year. It's cold, it's smelly, and it's far away from Jessica. Take it, and I won't report the embezzlement to the authorities. Refuse, and the police are waiting in the lobby." Richard stared at her. The humiliation was absolute. "I'll take it," he choked out. "Good," Serena said. "Pack your bags. You leave tonight." 2 weeks had passed. The media called it the Vance Revolution. Forbes magazine ran a cover story on Serena titled The Silent Strategist. The company stock had jumped 15% after she announced a new green energy initiative, something Richard had blocked for years. But silence in the Vance family never meant peace. It meant plotting. Richard did not go to Alaska. He had boarded the plane, yes, but he got off at the layover in Vancouver and doubled back, renting a cheap motel room on the outskirts of Seattle. He was desperate, furious, and fueled by a narcissist's inability to accept defeat. He sat in the dim motel room, the smell of stale cigarettes hanging in the air. Sitting across from him on the stained bedspread was Jessica. She wasn't happy. Her Porsche had been repossessed by the company lawyers, and her condo was being foreclosed on. "You said you were going to be rich," Jessica snapped, filing her nails aggressively. "Now you're a fugitive from your own wife. This isn't what I signed up for, Richard." "Shut up and listen," Richard growled. "I have a plan. Serena thinks she's untouchable because she has the financial high ground. But she has a weak spot." "What weak spot?" Jessica asked. "She's practically a saint in the press right now, the grieving widow who saved the company." "Her past," Richard said, a cruel smile forming. "She grew up in a trailer park in Ohio. Her father was a nobody. But there was an incident before she met me." Richard pulled out a crumpled manila envelope he had stolen from Arthur's private safe years ago, one of the few things Arthur hadn't digitized. "Arthur did a background check on her when we started dating," Richard explained. "He found out that when Serena was 18, she was detained for shoplifting. A loaf of bread and some medicine. The charges were dropped because she was a minor and it was a first offense, but the police report exists." "Shoplifting?" Jessica laughed. "That's it?" "Richard, people love a rags to riches story. She stole bread to survive, makes her look like a hero, not a villain." "Not if we doctor it," Richard said, his eyes gleaming with malice. "I have a friend in digital forensics, a guy I used to party with. We can alter the digital record, change bread to cocaine, change shoplifting to distribution. If we leak a police report saying the CEO of Vance Logistics was a drug dealer in her youth, the board will panic. The morals clause in the company bylaws is strict. Any evidence of past criminal activity involving narcotics creates an automatic vote of no confidence." "That's risky," Jessica said, intrigued. "If you get caught faking police records—" "We won't get caught," Richard insisted. "We leak it to a gossip blog first. Once the rumor starts, the stock drops. The board gets scared. They suspend her pending an investigation. And in that chaos, I call for an emergency family vote to reinstate me as interim CEO." "And what do I get?" Jessica asked. "You get to be the wife of the CEO," Richard promised. "I'll divorce her the second she's out of the chair." Meanwhile, across the city, Victoria was not idle. She had been forced to move into a smaller, two-bedroom condo downtown. It was luxurious by normal standards, but a prison cell for her. She sat at her small kitchen table, drinking cheap wine. Her phone buzzed. It was Marcus. "Mum, I can't work in the warehouse," Marcus whined. "My back hurts, and the guys there, they laugh at me." "Stop whining, Marcus," Victoria snapped. "I'm working on a solution." Victoria had decided to take a different approach. If Richard was the hammer, she would be the poison. She had arranged a lunch meeting with Silas Thorne, the CEO of Thorne Shipping, Vance Logistics' biggest and most ruthless competitor. They met at a secluded French restaurant. Silas was a shark in a suit, a man who had been trying to buy out Arthur Vance for decades. "Victoria," Silas purred, pouring her wine. "You look stressed. The downgrade in lifestyle doesn't suit you." "I want her destroyed, Silas," Victoria said, skipping the pleasantries. Serena? Silas chuckled. She's tough. She rejected my buyout offer yesterday. Said my company's environmental standards were medieval. She's a novice, Victoria insisted. She doesn't know the dark side of the business. Listen, Arthur kept a black book. A list of bribes paid to customs officials in foreign ports back in the 90s. It was how he built the Omo Empire. If that book comes to light, the DOJ will tear Vance Logistics apart. And where is this book? Silas asked, leaning in. I know where Arthur hid it, Victoria lied. She didn't know for sure, but she had a guess. I can get it for you. But in exchange, when you buy out the company for pennies on the dollar, you give me 10% and a seat on your board. Get me the book, Silas said, his eyes cold, and I'll make you a very rich woman. The wolves were circling. Richard was attacking Serena's reputation from the bottom, and Victoria was attacking the company's foundation from the top. The annual Logistics and Trade Charity Gala was the biggest event of the season. It was Serena's first major public appearance as CEO. She knew eyes would be on her. She wore a stunning emerald green gown that made her look regal, a stark contrast to the grey, invisible woman she used to be. Thomas, her head of security, walked close beside her. We have uninvited guests, ma'am, Thomas murmured into his earpiece as they entered the ballroom. Serena looked toward the entrance. Richard was there, wearing a tuxedo he had likely rented. Jessica was on his arm, wearing a dress that was far too flashy for a charity event. And in the corner, speaking to reporters, was Victoria. Let them in, Serena said, her face impassive. If they want to make a scene, let them do it where the world can see. The evening proceeded smoothly until the speeches began. Serena took the stage to thunderous applause. She began to speak about her vision for a sustainable future. Suddenly, the large projection screen behind her flickered. The logo of Vance Logistics disappeared. In its place, a grainy, photoshopped police report appeared. It showed a mugshot of a young Serena, one taken from her student ID, manipulated to look haggard. The text was blown up. Charges: possession with intent to distribute cocaine. The room gasped. Whispers broke out like wildfire. Is that true? Someone shouted. Serena turned and looked at the screen. She didn't flinch. She didn't panic. Richard stepped forward from the crowd, feigning shock. Oh my God. Serena, is this why you hid your past? You were a drug dealer. He turned to the board members sitting at the front table. Gentlemen, surely we cannot have a criminal running my father's company. This is a violation of the bylaws. She must step down immediately. Flashbulbs erupted. Reporters were shouting questions. Jessica was smirking behind her hand. Serena tapped the microphone. Thump, thump. Are you quite finished, Richard? She asked. Her voice boomed through the speakers, silencing the room. The evidence is on the screen, Richard yelled. You're a fraud. Thomas, Serena said calmly. Please play the other video. Thomas nodded to the technician booth. The screen flickered again. The fake police report vanished. A new video appeared. It was CCTV footage. It was time-stamped yesterday, 2:41 p.m. It showed the interior of a shady internet cafe. In the video, Richard Vance and a man in a hoodie were huddled over a laptop. The audio was crisp, likely recorded by a parabolic microphone or a bug. Video voice, Richard. Make sure the mugshot looks bad. Add bags under her eyes. Change the charge to cocaine. The board needs to think she's a junkie. Video voice. Hacker. This is going to cost you extra, man. Faking a police database entry is a felony. Video voice. Richard. Just do it. I need her ruined by the gala. The ballroom went deathly silent. Richard's face turned the color of ash. He backed away, bumping into a waiter and sending a tray of champagne crashing to the floor. Ladies and gentlemen, Serena said, her voice steady. My husband seems to have forgotten that Vance Logistics owns the premier cybersecurity firm in the state. We monitor threats to our executives. When Richard accessed the dark web to find a forger, our systems flagged it immediately." She looked down at Richard from the stage. "The actual police report," Serena continued, "was for stealing a loaf of bread and aspirin for my sick mother when I was 18 and we were homeless. I am not ashamed of my struggle. It made me who I am. But you, Richard, you should be ashamed." "Arrest him!" someone in the crowd shouted. Police officers, who had been waiting in the wings at Thomas's signal, moved in. They cuffed Richard right in the center of the ballroom. "No, no, it's a set-up!" Richard screamed as he was dragged out. Jessica tried to slip away, but officers blocked her path too, accomplice to fraud. Serena watched them go, then turned her eyes to the corner of the room, to Victoria. Victoria was trembling, clutching her purse. She had seen her son destroyed in seconds, but she still had her card to play. She had Silas Thorne. She looked toward the exit, planning to flee and meet Silas to hand over the Black Book location. But as Serena's gaze locked onto her, Victoria realized with a sinking feeling, she knows. Serena spoke into the microphone one last time. "Now, if you'll excuse me, I have one more family matter to settle." While Richard was being shoved into the back of a police cruiser outside the hotel ballroom, screaming about entrapment, Victoria Vance was already gone. She was speeding down the I-5 highway in her Mercedes, weaving through traffic with a reckless desperation that terrified the other drivers. Her hands gripped the steering wheel so tightly her knuckles were bone white. The rain had started again, a torrential Seattle downpour that hammered against the windshield, matching the chaos in her mind. "They can't take me," she thought, her breath coming in short, sharp gasps. "I am Victoria Vance. I am royalty." She fumbled for her phone, her long acrylic nails clacking against the screen as she dialed Silas Thorne. "Did you get it?" Silas's voice answered on the first ring. He sounded calm, almost bored. He had likely seen the news about the gala on TV. He knew the Vance family was imploding, and like a true scavenger, he wanted to pick the meat off the bones before the sharks arrived. "I'm going to the lake house," Victoria shouted over the sound of the rain and the roaring engine. "Arthur kept the ledger there. I remember seeing him hide it years ago. Inside the wall safe behind the portrait in the study. It has everything, Silas. The dates, the amounts, the names of every customs official he bribed in the 90s. It's the nuclear option." "And what makes you think I still want it?" Silas asked coldly. "Your son is in handcuffs, Victoria. The stock is plummeting." "That's exactly why you want it," Victoria shrieked. "This book proves Arthur was a criminal. Once I give this to the press, the Department of Justice will freeze all company assets. Serena will be forced to resign in disgrace. The stock will hit rock bottom, and you can buy the controlling share for pennies on the dollar." There was a pause on the line. The silence stretched for 5 agonizing seconds. "And my payment?" Silas asked finally. 10 million. Cash, and a private flight to Zurich," Victoria demanded, her voice trembling. "I can't stay here, Silas. Not after tonight." "Get the book. I'll meet you at the Lake House airstrip in 1 hour," Silas said. "Don't disappoint me, Victoria." The line went dead. Victoria arrived at the lake house 40 minutes later. It was a sprawling timber estate nestled deep in the woods, smelling of pine needles and old money. It was usually a place of peace, but tonight, in the storm, it looked like a haunted fortress. She abandoned her car in the driveway, leaving the door open to the rain, and ran to the front porch. She used her emergency key, one she had claimed to have lost years ago, and let herself in. The house was pitch black. She didn't turn on the lights. She didn't want to alert the groundskeeper. She used the flashlight on her phone, the beam cutting through the dusty air. Her heels clicked loudly on the hardwood floors, echoing like gunshots in the silence. She rushed into the study, a room that still smelled of Arthur's pipe tobacco. With a grunt of effort, she grabbed the heavy oil painting of Arthur's father and swung it away from the wall. There it was. The safe. She spun the dial. She knew the combination by heart. 08-24-55. It was her own birthday, a sentimental weakness of Arthur's that she had always mocked him for, but was now using to destroy his legacy. Click. The heavy steel door swung open. Victoria reached inside, her heart hammering against her ribs. She expected stacks of cash or a bag of diamonds. But there was only one item, a single, black, leather-bound notebook. Victoria grabbed it, clutching it to her chest like a lifeline. A manic laugh escaped her throat. "Got you," she whispered into the darkness. "I win." Suddenly, she heard the front door open. Footsteps approached, slow, deliberate, and heavy. "Silas," she called out, turning toward the hallway. "I'm in the study. I have it. We need to leave now." "It's not Silas, Victoria." The voice was calm, familiar, and absolutely terrifying. The overhead chandelier in the study flickered on, flooding the room with blinding light. Victoria gasped and shielded her eyes. When her vision cleared, she froze. Sitting in Arthur's heavy leather armchair, which had been turned to face the safe, was Serena. She wasn't wearing her gala gown anymore. She was dressed in a simple beige trench coat, her legs crossed, her hands folded calmly in her lap. Behind her, blocking the only exit, stood Thomas. He wasn't smiling. He stood with his arms crossed, looking massive and immovable. "How?" Victoria stammered, taking a step back until she hit the desk. "How did you get here?" "I drove. I was speeding." "I took the helicopter," Serena said simply. "It's significantly faster than a car, especially in this weather. And I knew exactly where you were going." "You can't stop me," Victoria hissed, her shock turning into cornered animal aggression. She waved the black book in the air. "I have the proof. This is the end of you, Serena. This book proves Arthur was a criminal. Even if you kill me, Silas knows. The world will know." Serena didn't move. She didn't look scared. She looked pitying. "Open it, Victoria," Serena said softly. "What?" "The book. You haven't even looked inside, have you? Open it. Read the first entry." Victoria sneered, her hands shaking violently. "You think I won't? I'll read it to the world. I'll make sure they drag his name through the mud." She flipped the heavy leather cover open. She turned to the first page, expecting to see columns of numbers, offshore account codes, and illegal payments. Instead, she saw Arthur's handwriting. But it wasn't a ledger. It was a letter. "My dearest Victoria," the page began. Victoria's breath hitched. She read on, her eyes darting across the lines. "If you are reading this, then I am dead. And if you have found this book, it means you have tried to betray me one last time. You were always looking for the shortcut, Victoria. You always believed that I built this company on corruption because you couldn't conceive of success without cheating. You convinced yourself I had a black book of bribes. I never did. I built this empire on hard work, a concept you never understood." "No," Victoria whispered, flipping the page frantically. "Where is it? Where are the numbers?" The next pages were filled with dates and logs, but they weren't records of Arthur's crimes. June 14th, 1998. Victoria forged my signature on a check for $50,000. I covered it so she wouldn't go to jail. August 2nd, 2005. Victoria accepted a kickback from the construction firm for the new warehouse renovation. I paid it back out of my own pocket. December 10th, 2015. Victoria and Silas Thorne met in secret at the Pierre Hotel to discuss insider trading. My private investigator sent me the photos. Victoria dropped the book as if it were made of molten lead. It hit the floor with a heavy thud. "It's not a record of his crimes," Serena said, standing up and walking slowly toward her mother-in-law. "It's a record of yours." Victoria backed up until her back was pressed against the cold wall. No, this is a trick. You planted this." "Arthur knew you were conspiring with Silas for years," Serena explained, her voice steady. "He knew you were feeding Silas trade secrets. That's why the company lost the naval contract in 2018. Arthur kept every receipt, every surveillance photo, every bank transfer. He compiled it all in that book and put it in the safe, knowing that the only reason you would ever open it was if you were trying to destroy the company." Serena stopped a few feet away. "You walked right into the trap, Victoria. Arthur gave you a choice. In the will, he gave you the stipend. You could have lived quietly. You could have been a grandmother if Richard ever grew up. But you chose greed, and Arthur knew you would." Outside, the sound of sirens wailed, getting louder and louder, cutting through the storm. Blue and red lights began to flash against the rain-streaked windows. I can fix this," Victoria gasped, looking around the room for a way out, but there was none. "Serena, please, we're family. I'm an old woman. You can't let them take me. Think of the scandal." The front door burst open downstairs. Heavy boots thundered in the hallway. It wasn't Silas Thorne. "Victoria Vance!" a voice boomed from the doorway. "Federal agents! Hands where we can see them!" 4 agents in FBI windbreakers swarmed the room, guns drawn. Serena stepped back, signaling Thomas to escort her out of the study. She didn't look at the agents. She looked only at Victoria. "Serena!" Victoria screamed as the agents moved in, grabbing her wrists and forcing them behind her back. The click of handcuffs signaled the end of her reign. "Serena, help me! I'm your mother! I took you in! Serena!" Serena paused at the doorway. She looked back at the woman who had mocked her poverty, who had treated her like a servant, who had tried to ruin her life for sport. "You didn't take me in, Victoria," Serena said, her voice cold and final. "You tried to break me. And now, you're just a line item I'm deleting from the ledger." Serena turned her collar up against the cold draft and walked out into the rain, leaving the screaming woman and the past behind her. 1 year later, the persistent grey rain of Seattle had finally broken, giving way to a crisp, brilliant autumn morning. Sunlight flooded the 40th floor of the Vance Logistics Tower, but the office didn't look the way Arthur Vance had left it. Serena had gutted the room. The heavy, oppressive dark oak paneling was gone, replaced by floor-to-ceiling glass and modern, sustainable bamboo furniture. The air no longer smelled of stale cigar smoke and secrets. It smelled of fresh espresso and orchids. Serena sat behind the massive glass desk, a fountain pen in her hand. Across from her sat a defeated-looking legal team representing what used to be Thorne Shipping. "The terms are non-negotiable," Serena said, her voice calm but cutting through the room like a laser. "I'm acquiring the fleet, the routes, and the warehouses. I am retaining 90% of the workforce. But the name Thorne will be scrubbed from every hull and every letterhead within 30 days. It will all be rebranded under Vance Green Tech." The lead lawyer sighed and pushed the documents forward. "Understood, Mrs. Vance. Silas, Mr. Thorne, has agreed to all conditions." Serena signed her name with a flourish. Serena Vance, CEO. It was the ultimate victory. Silas Thorne, the man who had conspired with Victoria to destroy her, was now living in a rented apartment, his legacy swallowed whole by the woman he had called a novice. "Thank you, gentlemen. Sarah will show you out," Serena said, dismissing them. As the lawyers shuffled out, the room fell quiet. Serena stood up and walked to the window, looking down at the bustling city below. She took a deep breath. She was tired, but it was a good kind of tired, the kind that came from building something, not from hiding. Miles away, in the dank, concrete reality of the Washington State Penitentiary, the morning routine was far less glamorous. Inmate 8940, formerly known as Richard Vance, was on cleaning duty. He pushed a mop bucket across the linoleum floor of the cafeteria. His custom Italian suits were a distant memory, replaced by a baggy orange jumpsuit that irritated his skin. On the wall, a small television was playing the morning financial news. And in a stunning move, Vance Logistics has announced record-breaking profits for the third quarter, solidifying Serena Vance as the businesswoman of the year. Richard stopped mopping. He stared at the screen. There she was. Serena. She looked radiant, powerful, and untouchable. She was smiling at the camera, a smile she had never shown him. "Hey, Vance!" a guard shouted, banging his baton on a table. "Stop daydreaming and clean up that spill. You missed a spot." Richard gripped the mop handle until his knuckles turned white. He looked back at the spill. It was oatmeal. He was cleaning up someone else's mess. "Yes, sir," Richard whispered, bowing his head. The irony was a bitter pill he had to swallow every single day. He had treated his wife like a servant, and now he was the help. Even further away, in a humid, cramped apartment complex in Boca Raton, Florida, Victoria Vance was standing in the express lane at a discount grocery store. She wore big sunglasses to hide her face, though nobody here knew who she was. She was fumbling with a handful of paper coupons. "Ma'am, this coupon expired 2 months ago," the teenage cashier said, popping her gum. "I can't accept it." "Do you know who I am?" Victoria snapped, her old instincts flaring up. "I am Victoria Vance. I demand to see your manager." "Lady, there's a line," a man behind her yelled. "Move it or pay up." Victoria froze. She looked at the total on the screen. $45.50. She checked her wallet. She only had $40 of her government allowance left for the week. Her face burning with humiliation, she took a bottle of cheap wine out of her cart and set it aside. "Take this off," she muttered. "Whatever," the cashier said. Victoria walked out of the store, the plastic bags cutting into her fingers. There was no driver to pick her up, no limo, just the hot, sticky Florida sun and a long walk to a lonely apartment where the phone never rang. Back in Seattle, the elevator doors to the penthouse office slid open. Thomas stepped out. He wasn't just a security guard anymore. He was the director of operations, though he insisted on driving Serena personally on important days. "The car is ready, Serena," Thomas said warmly. He had stopped calling her Mrs. Vance in private months ago at her request. They were partners now. "Thank you, Thomas," Serena said, turning away from the window. She walked past the large mirror in the hallway. She paused for a second. She remembered the woman who had stood in the rain at Arthur's funeral, soaking wet, shivering, afraid of her own shadow. That woman was gone. In her place stood a titan. She smoothed the lapel of her emerald blazer. She didn't check her phone to see if Richard had written. She didn't worry about what Victoria was plotting. Those were ghosts. "Let's go visit Arthur," Serena said, walking toward the elevator. "I want to tell him that we finally bought the competition. He's going to get a real kick out of that." As she walked through the lobby, the receptionists, the security team, and the junior analysts all stopped what they were doing. They didn't bow in fear, as they had for Richard. They stood tall and smiled. "Good morning, Ms. Vance." Great work on the merger, Ms. Vance. Serena smiled back, a genuine warm smile. She walked out the revolving doors, Thomas holding the umbrella for her, not because she was helpless, but because she was the queen. The ignored wife had vanished. The CEO had arrived. And the world would never overlook her again. What a roller coaster. Serena went from being the ignored help in the background to the most powerful woman in the room, taking down the greedy vultures who underestimated her. It just goes to show that you should never judge someone by their silence. Sometimes they're just waiting for the right time to speak. If you enjoyed this story of karma and sweet revenge, please hit that like button. It really helps the channel grow. And if you want more stories like this, where the underdog takes it all, make sure to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you never miss a video. What would you have done if you were Serena? Would you have forgiven Richard, or did he get exactly what he deserved? Let me know in the comments below. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next story.